Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little breakdown of all of the SEC teams, gave you quick thoughts on all of them, and now it's time to make some predictions. And I am very nervous about this one because this is a conference that could go any number of different directions. I probably had about 6 or 7 different matchups in Atlanta at the end of the year that I could sell myself on. But at the end of the day, I came back to the one that I just kept coming back to every single time, and that was Texas against Georgia. And I agree that this is a little bit bland. I totally understand that. But overall, these are two teams that when I look week to week, I just don't see anyone being able to match up long throughout the season. I think Georgia is one of those teams that people point to the really hard schedule and definitely something that Kirby Smart hasn't really had to deal with before. They'll be more than fine. They are comfortably a really good team and one of those teams that I think, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is just going to be impossible to deal with. Texas is one of those teams that people do have questions about the physicality as they walk into this conference, and frankly, I do too. But when I look up and down this roster, it's hard for me to find a place where they're really going to struggle. The offensive line is one of the best in the entire country. The D-line goes about 5 or 6 deep on that defensive tackle front, and the edge rushing is going to be as good as it's ever been. The back end is the other worry, but when you have really good edge rushing, the back end looks a lot better than it usually would. So I feel pretty good about these two really making not quick work by any means of this schedule, but definitely being the teams to beat throughout the entire year in this conference, and I expect them to be in Atlanta. Now, I do have LSU at 10-2, and this is a little bit me buying into this new defensive staff, buying into Harold Perkins being an absolute game changer, and all of that type of stuff. You have Ole Miss right there at 10-2 as well. I think this is a really good team. I think they're going to be able to put together a really special season and maybe win that Alabama game that has been eluding them, or win that LSU game that has been eluding them for quite some time. So I think this is going to be a really good team, and definitely a team that people are going to have to worry about this upcoming year. Alabama, I expect to take a step back. I just don't think this fits as quite as well as some people want it to. I don't think Jalen Milroe is going to take the big-time strides that he needs to take, and I think this defensive side of the ball is just not nearly as good as it needs to be, if I'm being totally honest. A&M is a really interesting team. There's just too many variables there. Tennessee is a team that I think could be, 11-1 at the end of the year, but when you look at, when they have to play Georgia, when they have to play Bama, when they have to play LSU, I just don't love those matchups for them, if I'm being totally honest, although they could easily win all of those matchups, honestly. Missouri is another team that I really like. I have too many questions when it comes down to that defensive side of the ball in particular about how they're going to handle Blake Baker moving on and that type of thing. So just didn't feel comfortable putting them all the way at the top. Oklahoma, I think, is going to be a good team, but is going to miss that physicality on the front that they're going to need to win this conference. Florida, I think, is going to be a much better team than people give them credit for, and I think a 7-5 Florida might just be a top 20, 25, 15 team in the country, if I'm being totally honest. Kentucky and Auburn, I think, are really interesting this upcoming year. They definitely are going to make some noise, but overall, week to week, I just don't necessarily love the product that is going to be put out on the field by them. I think South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas, and Vandy, it's just going to be a little bit tough. I think South Carolina can make some noise with Lenora Sellers, with Nick Harbor, with some of the athletic guys that they have. I think Mississippi State can get some guys off kilter with the offense that they're going to run, but overall, I just don't think it's going to be that pretty, and I do think Arkansas will have to find a new coach at the end of the year with Sam Pittman moving on, and then Vandy, it's Vandy. I wish I could put them anywhere else, but this is just the reality of where they're at in this conference right now. But let's move on to all of the predictions. You have my championship matchup in Texas and Georgia. It's one of those that I battle with myself about 10 different ways from Tuesday about, but at the end of the day, I feel pretty confident in these guys definitely being the best throughout the entire season and meeting in Atlanta. But let's get into predictions, and I do have Georgia winning this thing. I understand that there is going to be a big-time matchup in Atlanta, and Georgia's facing a schedule that by the time they get to Atlanta, they might be beaten and battered just a little bit, but this is the best team in this conference. It plainly is. This is a team that absolutely is going to make so much noise across every single aspect of this sport, and I think the biggest thing for me is Carson Beck is an absolute difference maker at quarterback. He's someone that they just haven't had in the past years, and someone that can make some throws that are just out of this world ridiculous. The wide receiver group is as good as there is in the country when you're talking about depth and being able to spread the ball around the field. You add that to the tight ends they have, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you can worry about the nitpicky things within that team, but when you have guys on every level that are as dominant as Michael Williams, as CJ Allen, as Malachi Starks, you're going to have very few problems on the defensive side of the ball. So I do think Georgia is going to take this thing home. I think the offensive player of the year will be Quinn Ewers, though. I think this offense, with Quinn Ewers going into his third year at Texas, I'm just betting on that being the big-time thing. When you go into a third year of an offense like Steve Sarkisian's, you tend to put up pretty crazy numbers. There's no two ways about that. What's up, Hawaii 5-0? Good to see you. Definitely a team that I think just has infinite amount of weapons. You look at this wide receiver group, and people are wondering, how do the transfer wide receivers fit in? Well, Isaiah Bond has gotten glowing reviews. Silas Bolden, even more so, has been absolutely maybe the talk of the town during their fall camp or during their summer workouts into fall camp. Matthew Golden is going to be a problem, whether it's receiving or returning. Then you have Ryan Wingo, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, and more guys that can catch the football. And then you add it to the tight end group with Gunnar Helm and Amari Niblack. It's going to be ridiculous the amount of ways that they're going to be able to get the ball out and play around with different defenses. And Steve Sarkisian can do that at an elite level, as we saw in 2020. The O-line is the best that Sark has had during his time at Texas, and it's by a pretty comfortable margin. I think Kelvin Banks over there at left tackle is one of those guys that you're not going to see a lot of people get through him, just plain and simple. It doesn't matter who they're playing. It doesn't matter who they're going up against. There's not going to be a matchup that he looks outmatched in. I can almost promise you that. So overall, I just think this kid is going to be special this year. I know Quinn Ewers has had some trouble in the past with some deep balls, but you make that slight adjustment on that deep ball, then the numbers are going to be absolutely ridiculous. And then the other guy I'm watching there is obviously Carson Beck. Another one, Luther Burden, would be very interesting in this spot, but overall, I think Quinn Ewers is going to be the guy that just puts up ridiculous numbers this upcoming year. Defensive Player of the Year, I do have Harold Perkins. This is one I debated in my mind for a long time, but overall, I just think he has to be. I think you bring in Blake Baker, you bring in this defensive staff, you bring in Kevin Peoples especially, you have to be able to put this guy in the right positions. And frankly, when that happens, he is a special player. We all watched him in his freshman year, and there was a moment where I was like, is this the best player in football? Even in his freshman year, where he just made every single play that was in front of him. It was absolutely remarkable, and he played some good football last year, even when he was misused, even when he wasn't put in the situations that he was supposed to. He was one of the best linebackers in this conference. So I think he's one of those guys that needs to be really good for LSU to make the noise that they want to, and he's going to be really good. He is an absolute beast on the outside, and one of those guys that is just going to be an absolute problem. He can straight up win games for you, whether it's with a pick or multiple sacks or anything in between. And I think he's going to do enough to get LSU to those 10 wins and get them in a position to possibly make the playoff at the end of the year. The other guy I'm watching here is Mykel Williams, the edge from UGA. I think that guy's going to be an absolute game wrecker this year and make just every quarterback life just problem. I'll be totally honest, for about 4 hours there on a Saturday. But the freshman of the year, I've gone back and forth on this one a little bit. I do think Cam Coleman will win it. I think he's just going to make enough plays. I don't necessarily think Auburn's going to be this remarkable team at the end of the year, but I do think he's going to be a guy that you look back and just are so excited about 2025 for him. I think he's going to be the leading receiver of the team. I think he's one of those guys that when you go up against the Georgias and the Alabamas, you're going to see that there's not really that big gap between him and everyone else. Obviously, Auburn's one of those teams where you rarely ever see a big-time gap, but this guy especially is going to match up on guys, and it's going to look unfair as a freshman. So he's someone that can totally tear apart defenses, and as you might have noticed, I have 2 freshmen of the years in the Big Ten and the SEC. They're both wide receivers. The freshman wide receiver class this year is going to go down as, frankly, one of the best in recent history, maybe one of the best in overall history. So a really remarkable group, and I think Cam Coleman might just lead the way in that respect. And then PJ Woodland, a corner at LSU, I think is going to have a really good year and could definitely be up for this award, and especially if he plays elite football and gets LSU's defense where it needs to be, he might just be a shoo-in for this award. And then the transfer of the year, I did go Trevor Etienne. I think he's going to have an effect on this team that is going to be just incredible. Whether it's running the ball behind this really good offensive line or catching the ball out of the backfield, I think he's going to be one of those guys that's just going to always make plays. There might be a couple of games where he gets bottled up. I know Florida is very much looking forward to trying to bottle this guy up, but overall, I think he's just going to be a problem. And when you have so many other things to worry about in that Georgia offense, Trevor Etienne could very easily just sneak out and catch a little 5-yard pass for 30 yards after he catches the ball. So I think he's going to be absolutely remarkable, and I think this elite O-line definitely helps that a lot. The other guy was Isaiah Bond. I was kind of going back and forth with them, but I think Texas is going to spread the ball out quite a bit, so I don't necessarily think Isaiah Bond's numbers are going to be out of this world crazy by any means. But yeah, overall, this conference is going to be a fight. There's so many different variables here, and frankly, I could very easily see, Texas going 9-3 and Tennessee going 11-1, or Ole Miss going 11-1 and Texas going 10-2. There are so many different variables here and so many different teams you could slot into that Atlanta matchup, and I would feel more than fine with it. But overall, when I look at it, Texas and Georgia are the two best teams walking into this conference this upcoming year. They have the most depth. They have the fewest questions. They have so many things going in the right direction for them. And it's hard for me to sit here and say with absolute confidence that anyone else is going to be in Atlanta. So call it a lame pick. I have no problem with that. It definitely is a little bit lame, but at the end of the day, I definitely do think those are the two best teams in this conference, and I think we'll see them in Atlanta, and then we might just see them again. So we might just see them 3 times during the season, but overall, I do have Georgia and Texas being the teams in Atlanta at the end of the year, with Georgia taking home yet another SEC title. But let's take another break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a recruiting update. Tennessee and Auburn have been on fire on the recruiting trail, and I got to break it down for you guys. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.